Over the last 20 or 30 years, China has been known for its exports of cheap consumer goods and electronics, and now they've become known for exporting pandemics and bad testing kits for the pandemic that they're exporting. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle on China, that whole country. All right, gentlemen, the latest news I found, the Czech Republic ordered 150,000 rapid testing kits for coronavirus from China. They received the testing kits, and people in the field are saying that they fail. They give a bad result up to 80% of the time, and it's apparently random. Sometimes it's a false positive, sometimes it's a false negative, so you can't read anything into these testing kits that I assume that they paid top dollar for to get sent so quickly in the midst of this crisis. Bill, let's start with you this time. We've talked a lot about decoupling with China, and this really drives it home. At the start of this outbreak, they asked for people to donate masks. We donated masks to them. Now we can't get any because guess what? They aren't exporting any more of in the midst of this crisis. How do we de-wed ourselves from a country like this?
Well, first of all, as a person who's never taken a check of any kind from the Communist Chinese government, let me say I think you're being a little hard on the Communist Chinese government. I think really the better way to look at what the situation in the Czech Republic is, not be so negative about things, Steve, is to say that 20% of the time it works all the time,
You got to cash that check now.
It's going to be PayPal, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
No, you're absolutely right. And listen, there's a fundamental difference between like accidents of fate, acts of God, things that nobody was expecting. I'm writing the entire world a pass for being caught unprepared for this only because it's human nature to know that there are awful things coming and do nothing about them until they arrive. We knew that there was this guy named Osama bin Laden, and he was talking about death to America. We knew this for 7, 8, 9 years, and finally he got our attention. We knew that the O-rings were burning through on the SRBs for many flights, and then finally they launched the Challenger, and that got our attention. Same thing with the foam in Colombia. That had happened many times before, and then that finally got our attention. So I'm willing to write a pass for that because that's just human nature and that's the way it is. But what I'm not willing to write a pass for is everything that happens after the initial outbreak. The initial outbreak seems to be a result of the wet markets, and we can talk about how distasteful they are to Westerners and all that stuff. I think China's going to pay such an enormous price for this downstream that the idea that they're doing this on purpose is just don't see any point in it. And secondly, you don't need it. These wet markets you cannot invent a more perfect way to get viruses from the animal population into the human population.
What's a wet market, Bill? I'm sorry.
A wet market is a Chinese market where any number of live animals are brought to the market. It sometimes can be 100 animals, bats, raccoons, all of it. And they'll have a cage of chickens on top of a cage of weasels, all of which are going to be consumed. And they basically serve them right up there, or at least skin them and cut them right there. So it's a wet market because it's slathering in virus-infected blood. That's why it's called a wet market. Now, I'm ready to, like I said, I'm not doing this out of great generosity or love for China, but I understand that it's not fair to blame China for things that are built into human nature. And one of the things that's built into human nature is to know that something bad is coming, but I'm not going to do anything about it today because it didn't happen yesterday. Didn't happen today, probably won't happen tomorrow. That much I'm ready to give them a pass for. But from that moment, everything that they've done is not just negligent. It's criminal. It's absolutely criminal. It's criminal to have destroyed evidence and to have destroyed samples when they knew that this was out of the box. It's criminal to have locked down the whistleblowers that were trying to get out of there, and including the guy who died. I'm not entirely sure he died of the virus, to be perfectly honest with you, knowing what communist governments are capable of. It's absolutely criminal to minimize all of this. It's criminal to say that they've got it contained. It's criminal to do all of that. And of all the things that the Chinese are doing, of all of it, the thing that is the most criminal is they are denying They are denying the world access to accurate data about what this disease is doing. And they are 50 days ahead of the United States. They're at least 40 days, 35 days ahead of Italy. In other words, whatever is happening in China is where the whole world is going. And for them to be opaque about this and to claim, oh, no new cases today. This isn't just face saving now. Now we're talking about, okay, this happened in your country. It happened. But once it happened, you knew it happened and you didn't say anything. And you had a chance to contain it and you decided not to tell the world because you wanted to save face. And you could have had Western help in there at the beginning and at the very least Western metrics, and you didn't do that. You've been lying about everything since then. Now you've created this apparently clearly false statement that, oh yeah, all the new cases are just gone and we're pretty much over it. This is criminal malfeasance on the part of the Chinese, and thousands of people are going to die. And again, I can't be clear enough about this. I don't think it's China's fault necessarily that this virus came into the world through Chinese wet markets. It's a different cultural thing. It wasn't designed to create virus around the world. But once it happened, you come face to face with the totalitarianism of communism and this idea that the overall socialist idea that people are essentially cogs in a giant machine. And as long as the machine does okay, it doesn't matter what happens to the cogs. If one wears out, just throw it out and put a new one in. That is criminal, and it continues to be criminal, and it becomes more criminal on a daily basis. Every day that goes by that we don't get accurate data from China, and we're clearly not, and there's no question about that, is another day where the laboratory of what of the pattern of this disease and the pattern of treatment, which is ahead of us by at least a full month, probably almost 2 months. What's happening in China now is the future for the rest of the world. It's like a 40-day view into the future. And they're not sharing us what the future holds. They're not telling us what the future holds because they're just somehow determined that they're going to weather this thing out. And I didn't take any of this personally until they blamed it on the U.S. Military. And at that point, I said, okay,
oh, yeah,
you're going to get everything that's coming to you in terms of economic blowback for this. So, when they say things like some of these treatments, the hydrochloroquine treatments are working, that seems to be true because it's proven in other countries. But I don't believe a word that comes out of China. I don't believe anything that comes out of China. They've not been honest at any point in this entire process. And the giant tragedy of this is it's not like the Czech Republic not being open with the data. This is the epicenter. This is the future. This is what is happening and what's going to happen. And for them to be lying at this stage is, to me, reason to never buy another Chinese product again unless it is something I absolutely cannot do without and there is no other manufacturer available. And I think we are going to rapidly see the entire world disengage from China as a manufacturing base, not because it originated there, but because of the fact that they would rather save face for their communist regime. And even if that costs hundreds of thousands of deaths around the world, of non-Chinese citizens as well, by the way, then that's a price they're willing to pay. And people like that don't belong on the same planet with adults and free people. China needs to be quarantined until the Communist Party is gone and actual human beings are running that society.
Yeah, Bill, you make such a great point. China has one of the world's great entrepreneurial people that have ever existed. And to have that combination of that entrepreneurialism, but which would normally be a huge boon to the world, with this oppressive, lying, propagandistic Chinese communist government is just an absolute lethal combination. Like it's basically a third world communist dictatorship with this first world manufacturing base tacked onto it. And it's proving to be a very deadly combination. Scott, Americans, after a big crisis, we tend to tend to our wounds first, and then once we're able to stand up again, there's usually hell to pay. What do you think the future is going to look like between us and China after the dust settles and we've healed up from this?
Frankly, I don't think it's going to be much different. And here's why. Because markets are global. Manufacturing goes to the place where it can be done most efficiently at the lowest cost. It used to be, before the ocean became basically a pond that you could step over, it used to be that our manufacturing sort of bread and butter was immigrants. It was people coming into this country that could work in factories. Once we realized that we could manufacture this stuff overseas, have it shipped here relatively rapidly, then it became, okay, so what country offers the best deal right now as far as dollars per hour or per piece to manufacture something? And when you're talking about manufacturing in China, you've got a combination of factors there. You've got essentially state-run operations. You've got Chinese private individual operations, but you've also got a lot of operations that are owned by companies around the world, including in the United States, that are outsourcing their manufacturing operations. Apple, for example, although by far not the only one, that it subcontracts with Foxconn to manufacture their phones. They manufacture exquisite phones. They do a beautiful job of it. In fact, the Chinese people are very hard workers, and they know how to run a meticulous factory and make things clean and make things well and make them at a low cost. Now, what's for a low cost for us is actually a step up in standard of living for them, because we're getting people who, as Bill points out, from what was essentially a third world country, we're getting people who used to wade around in rice paddies and have a total expectation that not only their children, but their grandchildren were going to be wading around in rice paddies. And now, liberals in the United States are lamenting that these people are living in dormitories and working at Foxconn. Those people are thinking, holy heck, I don't have to wade around in ox manure anymore. This is pretty awesome. And so there's a benefit to have global supply chains like this, because it allows people around the world to step up to a better standard of living. Anytime you have more people who are on that trajectory toward capitalism or on that trajectory toward democratic forms of government, you have less threat of war in the world. China, not only do we owe China a lot, China owes us a lot. And so our hands are deep in their pockets and vice versa. So there's benefit, but there's also threat there. And the threat not only comes from things like pandemics or shoddy products that are shipped overseas, but also from the fact that we have allowed our own manufacturing base to degrade to the extent that if we were to have to mount a war effort on a plane with something that like World War II, it would be very difficult for us to ramp up at this point, because that industrial base has largely been outsourced and shipped overseas. And so, balancing all these factors takes a lot more wisdom than any one person has. But I do think you have to be conscious of it if you're a corporate executive and say, okay, if we're going to ship this overseas to get cheaper labor, what are the trade-offs for that? In my industry, my other full-time job selling furniture, a lot of those companies that were manufacturing in China had started to move to Vietnam already because it's cheaper labor there, but also less problems dealing with the government. And frankly, they're kind of stagnated right now because they can't get their Chinese workers out of China into Vietnam to set up these manufacturing facilities. This calls, like I said, for incredible wisdom. I don't criticize anybody who's trying to make a go of it in this global marketplace. And I don't think we can just roll it back and say, okay, let's go back to the good old days when the United States, had textile factories out the wazoo.
I'd like to just add one thing to that, just real quick. Because I agree with Scott about the general principle. The market, when the dust is settled, the market will do what the market does, and the market will go to manufacture products as cheaply as possible, wherever that may be. But the thing that I think is very different now is that now, if you're thinking about the money you saved in China, you have to start thinking about how much money you've lost when the entire economy is shut down. The factor, the harm that's been done by the global chain. This is the first time the global chain of supply has caused harm. It's always caused benefit. I'm talking about a price analysis only from what the market cares about. Now, this is a factor. This is something that's going to have to be factored in. It is no longer considered, yes, it's just cheaper. Let's go there. It's going to be cheaper in the future, but is it going to be cheaper worth the price? Is the risk that's been exposed by this crisis going to make that is it going to, in other words, if I can save 10 cents on the widget in China, and afterwards I can spend 10 cents on the widget, but I lost 40 cents on the widget as a result of this, does that change the calculation? And I think for a lot of people, it's going to. Plus, cheaper American energy enters the picture too, but that's a whole other story.
That is. We'll have to do a show on that someday because it's a fun topic to talk about. One of the points Scott raises about all this manufacturing for export that China does, but it's mostly other people's products. Apple's products is the example he gave. It might say assembled in China, but it's designed in California, and the components come from Taiwan, South Korea, Europe, the United States. The assembly is what happens in China. Two of the hardest things in the world to manufacture, the most demanding things to manufacture are cars and airplanes. China can't produce a car to export to the first world, and I don't see anybody clamoring to get on a Chinese airliner, even after all of Boeing's problems with the 737 MAX. So that should maybe put a little bit of a tamper on our excitement to continue building things in China. That said, we have a history, just like anybody, and Bill brought this up, getting caught with our pants down from time to time. It happened at Pearl Harbor. Happened on 9/11. It happened in Korea in 1950, and our response late, but it's there was a thing after December 7, no more Pearl Harbors, and then no more 9/11s. We put systems in place to try and prevent that. One of the reasons we got so serious about putting satellites in orbit, spy satellites, was so we couldn't get snuck up on again and have Pearl Harbor attack. Well, not necessarily Pearl Harbor, but to get caught by surprise in that way. And there haven't been any Pearl Harbors since that fateful December morning. On 9/11, we learned satellites aren't enough. We need human intelligence, and we need it in some of the worst spots in the world, and we need it like thousands of lives depend upon it every day, because thousands of lives depend upon it every day. As a result, there hasn't been another 9/11-sized attack on American soil. We can all be very thankful for that. Now we need to decide, what systems do we need to put in place to prevent another coronavirus erupting out of China or somewhere else in the world and arriving on these shores like they have in these last few weeks? I don't have the answers for that, or at least not yet, but it's something we need to think about. We're going to spend the next few weeks, hopefully not the next few months, in a low posture position as a nation, as a planet. But once that dust is settled, once this pandemic is over, we need to have some serious conversations with ourselves and with the rest of the world about what systems we're going to put in place to prevent the next coronavirus. That's your right angle on that. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. Thanks so much for watching. Content like this needs sponsors like you. So please click on over to BillWhittle.com, become a member today. We would love to have you on board. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.